Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or perhaps good night for depending on the time zone that you're in at the moment, dear attendants. As the president of the upcoming WAS Congress and as the president of the host association, the Turkish Association of Cognitive and Behavior Therapy, I would like to thank you all for joining and sharing your precious time with us at this webinar to promote the 26th World Association of Sexology Congress that will be held in Antalya between 2nd and 5th of November 2023. As you probably all know, the major aim of World Association of Sexology is to promote sexual health and sexual rights for all without leaving any people or any discriminated groups behind. WAS is a global organization that aims to promote all of these things. And this is achieved by advancing education, research, and good practice, and care and services. Based on this aim of WAS, the theme of our Congress is chosen as Bridging the Gaps: Sexual Health, Sexual Rights, Sexual Justice, and Sexual Pleasure for All. Obviously, this is a great theme, and this is also a very important and unmet need all around the world today. So we need the rights, and it's not luxury anymore to have rights and to have kind of justice for sexual health and sexual rights for everyone. So I think that's a very important unmet need all around the world. So the Turkish Association of Cognitive Behavior Therapy and WAS will no doubt deliver a high quality kind of scientific program that will really give you a taste about the cutting edge kind of advances in the area of sexology and in the area of sexual practice by research and by clinical practice. And I think more information about this will be given by the scientific chair, Eric Janssen, in a few minutes. On top of the high quality of the scientific program, we would like to deliver you that a very social and socially memorable Congress, which will turn this ordinary Congress into a memorable one. I can tell you that the Congress venue, Antalya, is the Turkish Riviera on Mediterranean Sea with 300 days of sunshine and amazing beaches. And Hotel Mirage Park, which you have seen on the screen, is an all-inclusive hotel. That means that you can eat and drink as much as you like, as long as that doesn't interfere with the scientific program. So please try to make most of your stay and make sure that you see the surroundings, as the resort is surrounded by historical and charming landmarks and also very ancient cities that has been built 3,000 years ago, such as the Termassos city, ancient city of Termassos, and Perge, and city of Olympos, and city of Vasilis, and also the Hadrian Gate. So make sure that most of your time is not totally given to this Congress, but also to discover all these historical and beautiful landmarks around the venue that the Congress is going to be held. And I can promise you that we will be at your disposal to make your stay as enjoyable and as comfortable as we can. So if there's anything that you want to bring in, please don't hesitate to ask me. or to ask our group, and we'll do our best to make your stay a pleasurable one. At this point, I would like to briefly introduce you the highly esteemed specialists and scientists at this platform. I would like to start with our hardworking and multi-skilled president, Elna Rudolph. Elna, your efforts to improve the efficiency of WAS organization is highly appreciated, and I have no doubt WAS will have more impact on the field of sexology all around the world during your presidency. So thanks very much for all your kind efforts and generous efforts. By the way, I have to express that the kind of anger from my family towards me is also on you, as you make these regular long hours kinds of meetings almost every week, and I love that. And I'm very happy to face with the anger that comes from the family, but you're doing a great job, and I'm sure that during your time it will be great and will have the impact of the WAS on all of the field during the time that you are the president. Of course, I would like to, as the second kind of person that I would like to introduce you, is someone who needs no introduction at all, and that is Elaine Giami, who has been the vice president of the World Association of Sexology, and Elaine has been a great and friend and a colleague for me over decades. So I appreciate your wisdom and contributions, Ellen. Thanks so much. And of course, I have to tell you about our diligent scientific chair, Eric Jansen, who's here with us, who has been a great role model for many young professionals and clinicians and researchers. So thanks for all your contributions and your careful and diligent work on the scientific program, Eric, and I'll give the microphone to you in a few minutes to tell more about the scientific side of the Congress. Apart from the Congress committee members that I have presented until now, there's a name that we have to really talk and we have to mention. This person is a person that we all love and that we owe, and that is Louis Perelman, who's the General Secretary of WAS and whom everybody knows. And without you, WAS wouldn't be the same. So please stay there as long as you can. At this point, I would like to leave the platform to Dr. Eric Jansen, who will give you the further information regarding the scientific program and the submission dates. So the platform is yours, dear Eric.
Thank you so much for that introduction. As the chair of the WAS Scientific Committee, it is my pleasure, and that of the Scientific Committee's vice chairs, Kristen Mark and Terry Humphreys, to invite you all to join us at this year's conference in beautiful Antalya. We will be offering a program filled with presentations and symposia covering a wide range of state-of-the-art topics and cutting-edge areas in all aspects of sexual health and sexual rights. As a global organization, WAS is deeply committed to promote sexual health and sexual rights for all individuals across the life course. And we would love you to join us this meeting and to actively participate. So please do consider to submit an abstract or more than one for oral or poster presentations, symposia, but we also welcome suggestions and abstracts for debates, workshops, demonstrations, roundtables, skills classes. All the abstracts should be submitted in English, and they will be reviewed by the WAS Scientific and the International Scientific Committees. And accepted ones will be published in the International Journal of Sexual Health, the official journal of WAS. And I have some other good news. The deadline for submissions has been extended to June 30th. So please do send in your work, come to Antalya, meet old and make new friends and share your work with us.
Thank you so much, Eric. You made it clear, but I would like to emphasize once again that it's not only the submission that is the submission dates that is extended, but also the early registration fee is also extended until the end of June. So please make your profit out of this early registration as soon as possible, and it's also extended. So I hope that you are going to enjoy yourselves, because the hotel that we provide for you is a hotel that is all included, and it's at a very reasonable price, impossible to be gained at this point because of the lots of tourists coming from everywhere. And just to inform you all that Antalya, I'm sure that most of you have heard about the disaster that our people have passed through over the last few months, which is the earthquake disaster. And I would like to remind you all that Antalya is a venue where we never had earthquakes. So please feel safe about coming to Antalya, the beautiful historical and touristic resort. And I'm sure that you will enjoy your time during your stay in Antalya. At this point, I would like to introduce you the eminent Turkish WAS Scientific Committee members who has kindly joined us during this meeting, despite their busy agenda. So let me just start with a very, very outstanding lady, Dr. Semra Kahraman, who is a lifetime friend for me, who's my classmate, although she seems younger than me, of course, and also who's a unique and kind of outstanding, globally recognized gynecologist that represents a track which is called basic science, because we have different tracks at the Congress, and the basic science is represented by Semra. Semra, the platform is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Mehmet. It's a great pleasure to talk in here. I am a gynecologist, but also an infertility specialist. But I have been focused on the basic science, as Mehmet just already stated. Well, we are all aware that sexual health is the common goal of many disciplines, of course, including our discipline. And I'm sure that the outstanding content of the Congress will be answering all the questions of the related topics. Therefore, we are very proud to be hosting the 26th WAS Congress in Turkey this year. And I'm sure that not from all over the world, but many colleagues from Turkey will be attending to this conference, because we have already started to disseminate all the relevant materials and the leaflets in the forthcoming conferences. For example, one of them will be held very soon, European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology Congress, which will be held in Copenhagen, and more than 10,000 people are going to attend. And also around the same time, there will be another Turkish largest infertility meeting in Antalya. And I'm sure that with our effort, many Turkish colleagues will be held to this conference also. Thank you, Mehmet, again, just sharing with us this beautiful conference organization.
Thanks, Semra, for your kind contributions. And I have to remind you about the first multidisciplinary Congress that we organized in 1992 with you.
That's true.
And
That's true.
where more than 750 people attended for 1992's. That was a great Congress, a multidisciplinary Congress, and you made a great contribution on that Congress. So I would like to thank you and hope the same for the upcoming WAS Congress that will be held in Antalya.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
The second person whom I want to introduce is at the airport at the moment. So Dr. Ateş Kadıoğlu, I think thank you so much for staying with us, because I know that you have to take a plane. And Dr. Ateş Kadıoğlu has been the president of the Turkish Urology and Andrology Association, and who's a well-recognized figure at international platforms, representing another track, which is called the sexual medicine track. So the platform is yours, Atesh.
Thank you very much, Professor Sungur. I'd like also to thank to WAS, World Association of Sexology, for giving us the opportunity to be a part of this very important congress, multidisciplinary, would I say. Again, I am urologist and dealing in sexual and reproductive medicine. And just mentioned by Professor Sungur, I am the honorary president of Turkish Society of Urology and Andrology, with 3,000 members. I'm in the Urology Society, and 750 members is the Andrology Society. We will certainly endorse this Congress among our members and put our time and energy to promote the Congress again among our members, and also try to raise funds from the industry to sponsor our colleagues to attend the meeting. And I am convinced that the meeting is going to be a success. And again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and looking forward to proceed with the scientific announcement, scientific program, announcement of scientific program, and endorse the meeting among our Congress. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Atesh. Thanks, Professor Kadioğlu, for all this beautiful talk that you give. But I would like to remind you, just like I reminded Semra, that remember we had the largest Congress of the ESSM and EFS in Istanbul, where Atesh was the representative of the ESSM, and I was the representative of EFS, as I'm the president of the European Federation of Sexology. I think we had the biggest Congress that was ever done all around the world, which was around 4,000, 3,000, more than 3,000 people, I guess.
Yes, right. 2014, 2014, we both chaired the ESSM Istanbul meeting, and it was the most attended meeting of the ESSM ever. And with this experience, also we will extrapolate this experience gained, from the international organization, organizing international congress, also to WAS 2023. Also, 2023 is very important year for us. As you may know, this is the foundation of the Turkish Republic. And to organize the meeting in this year is also a big honor. So I would also underline the importance of, being this year, the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the Turkish Republic.
Thanks very much. That's a very wonderful and great reminder. I think it's very important to keep in mind that's the 100th year of the Turkish Republic. Thanks for reminding us about that, and thanks for all your efforts. And I know that with your help and with all the Turkish people's help, we will have as many people as possible from Turkey to attend and learn, and perhaps to contribute to all these congresses. And I believe that we all believe, as the organizers, that the scientific quality of a congress always depends on the contribution of its delegates. So we are hoping that we are going to have an active participation from all of these people who attended today and who's likely to attend the Congress. And thanks very much for reminding us about the Republic and also the Congress that we organized together in 2014, which had the highest attendance forever. And we hope that we will have a good attendance at the upcoming UAS Congress. Thanks, Atesh. I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Koray Bashar, who's a professor of psychiatry and who was the past president, one of the past presidents of the Turkish Psychiatry Association, who's very well recognized and highly esteemed by his work for human rights and for rights of the discriminated groups. So, Koray, platform is yours.
Thank you, Mehmet, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for this effort to come together. I am a professor of psychiatry, and I was trained in sex therapy in the Society for Sexual Education, Treatment, and Research in Turkey, and I'm actually working as an educator in that society now. I've been working in sex therapy for years, but specifically working in with LGBTI plus individuals and their families, specifically the gender affirming medical care, which is one of the highest interest areas for multidisciplinary work in sexual health, but all areas require multidisciplinary work. But any activity we do in this domain requires a close intersection with sexual rights and sexual ethics. So all colleagues working in each activity of this field benefit a lot from coming together in scientific and professional meetings as we are organizing in Antalya this year. So I hope we will have a fruitful meeting in November in Antalya, and I think almost all colleagues from these divergent disciplines will be interested in coming together and discussing the emerging models of care for people, and people will also benefit from our coming together, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Koray. Yes, you have contributed a lot, and thanks very much for working for the rights of the discriminated groups, both in Turkey and all around the world. I think this is a very important and unmet need to give good service to all of these minorities or the groups that are discriminated. So you're doing a great job, and I hope that your talk is going to give us a kind of perspective about the unmet needs all around the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And lastly, but not as the least, Professor Emre Akkuş, who's also another well-recognized scientist and anthropologist, which is known all around the societies all around the world for his contributions in the area of andrology. So the platform is yours, Emre.
Thank you, Mehmet. It's an honor to be with you tonight. It will be a very successful meeting. That's exactly what I believe. I had organized such meetings in the past. In 2000, I had organized an ESSM meeting as the general secretary of the meeting. And then in 2003 in Istanbul, we had another ESSM meeting, which I was the president of the meeting. I had been the executive committee member of ESSM for several years. Now I am the member of a grants and prizes committee of ISSM, International Society for Sexual Medicine. It will be a very good meeting, and Antalya is a very good site for this meeting. It's a very popular area. I'm sure it will be a big success. Mehmet is a friend of mine since like 1970s. So I'm sure he will be very successful with this meeting. So we invite you to Turkey, to this beautiful city of Antalya. I'm sure you will all enjoy it. As previously mentioned, this year is the 100th year of the foundation of Turkish Republic. So it's another honor for us. You see our founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, is here. So we are on his way to be a modern country, and we'll show you how a good organization will be. So I'll be very happy to contribute this meeting. Currently, there's another society in Turkey, Society of Urological Surgery, and we andrologists work in the as a chamber of the Society of Urology. And we also try to endorse our members to participate in the meeting, and hopefully they will. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope it will be a very nice meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Emre, for mentioning how old we are and how long we have known each other for. And thank you so much. And apart from that, yes, it's wonderful to mention to Atatürk, who's the leader of all of the Turkish Republic. So thank you for mentioning his name and showing his photograph. And I hope that we can carry on his path. So Emre is also kind of representing the sexual medicine part. And as you have heard, he has lots of contributions, both globally and also nationally, for improving the practice of andrologists in different ways. Thank you, Emre, for your kind introduction.
My pleasure.
Actually, there's another one who's Timur Gurgan, but he's not with us due to a kind of family problem, a kind of sickness in his family, so he wasn't able to attend, but he will attend us on the next occasions. So we have talked about 5 different tracks, as you know, and different people represented different tracks, such as sexual medicine, such as sexual basic science, sexual ethics, and also public health and policies. And apart from these 5 tracks, I would like to know to inform you that we have 2 more tracks, which is the social and behavioral sciences and education. So we've got 7 tracks that you can submit for, and the submissions are kind of extended until the end of June. So please try to be as active as possible, and please submit your wonderful, or either as a poster or symposium or different formats. You can find it on the website. So there are different formats, and to be fair, we just wanted everyone to send their submissions through our portal, web portal, so that we can be as neutral as possible. So please send all your submissions. And at this point, well, I would like to leave the platform to our Vice President, Dr. Elaine Giami, to introduce Elna to make her talk. So platform is yours, Elaine.
Thank you, Mehmet. Thank you for organizing such a very interesting meeting. And I'm very happy to meet finally the Turkish colleague, and I hope it is the starting point of a series of encounter, discussion, fruitful discussion, and that we will learn from each other during the preparation of the Congress and the Congress itself in this wonderful place like Antalya. But now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce the Vice President, Dr. Elna Rudolph Grobler, and I am so happy to introduce her because we are so different. We are so different. And after about 2 years of working together as president and vice president, we did not quarrel. So, and this is, this is the miracle of WAS. And I want to remind that Dr. Elna is a medical doctor. She degreed, she was trained in South Africa, and as a medical doctor, she was trained as a sexologist in South Africa also, and then she had training, all over different places. She joined the WAS advisory committee of WAS in 2013 in Brazil. So I think it was maybe the first time that, no, we met before, I don't remember. Okay, but we met, let's say that it started in Brazil, which is not a bad starting point. And then she started, to develop a very important organizational interest, with the membership, with the organization. And then it was a moment, when it was a moment to find a president, it looked to me and to other people that she was the most qualified, to become the new president. And it was not a bad choice, finally, because she's moving us, we hold bags, from WAS, and it's good to have a new generation to come to take care of the business of WAS. And it is the health, I would say, of this organization to have been able to have such a young president and such a skilled and what I would say, first I am impressed by the organizational skills, which I don't have, but then I am also impressed by, I am not a medical person, but I am very impressed by the fact that this medical doctor has such a strong interest in human rights sexual rights and sexual justice. And this is exactly one of the mission of WAS, to include human rights, sexual rights, and sexual justice inside the health practitioners, and in particular, and among other health professionals, among the physician, who are, one of the first choice health professional to meet patient. And this mixture between science, medical arts, and I would say human rights and social justice, sexual justice, is an excellent combination for WAS, and I'm happy that we work together. So please, you have the floor to talk, and welcome to this session.
Thank you so much, Elna. I appreciate that sincere introduction, and I appreciate everyone's presence here as the audience and our very esteemed guests from Turkey on the panel as well, and my sincere gratitude towards WAS and all of our member organizations that have put their trust in me to be the president of this of the organization. But I can tell you, being the president of a Congress is even more scary than to be the president of the World Association for Sexual Health. I was the president of the previous Congress, and I am deeply grateful towards Mehmet for taking up the time and the responsibility and sacrificing his family to be the president of this upcoming Congress. I know, Mehmet, I've backed you from the start. I know you are going to make a big success from this Congress. Thank you so much. So I'll share my presentation with you. I hope you don't experience death by PowerPoint tonight, but I hope it will be enjoyable for you. So the World Association for Sexual Health, Rights, Justice, and Pleasure for All. And of course, our Congress coming up and being about bridging the gaps between these. So I first need to tell you a little bit why I am so different from Alan. I am, and the reason why I do this is because I am maybe very, very different from you two, and maybe very similar in some ways. I'm a cisgender, heterosexual, vanilla, monogamous, white, privileged, Christian, ethical, science and rights-based medical doctor, and I volunteer as the president of WAS, and I'm a mom. And the patients that we see in our practices, or the people that we educate, are very similar to us in some ways and completely different from us in many ways. And I know nothing about Turkey. I've never even been to Turkey, and I am really excited to come there. And I know nothing about your clinical practice wherever you work in the world. But that's the reality for all of us. We cannot assume that because of how we are or who we are, we will know what to do for the person sitting in front of us. And it is so important that we practice scientific, evidence-based, rights-based, experience-informed, context-sensitive medicine or therapy or education, however you are involved in sexual health. And I hope that nothing that I say here offends you from a cultural or religious perspective, or your scientific convictions. I do it respectfully, although we are talking about sexual pleasure. So the mission of WAS is to actively create a world in which all people have access to sexual health, rights, justice, and pleasure. We achieve this through strategic collaborations globally, regionally, and locally, like we do with the TACBT that is hosting this conference, to educate sexual health professionals, promote and showcase sexuality research, do standard setting in sexology and sexual health, advocate for sexual health, rights, justice, and pleasure, and facilitate sexual health and rights policymaking. We are in consultative status with ECOSOC. This is the place where non-governmental organizations can actually speak into the UN and change the climate of sexual health and rights globally. I mean, they don't only have a sexual health and rights agenda, but we have been invited to this table to actually change the climate. And of course, we are fully committed to the sustainable development goals. Not all of them fall within our scope, but we do work towards many of them. We are busy updating the website of WAS. Within the next few days, you will see a beautiful new website of WAS. In the meantime, please feel free to visit the Congress website, was2023.org. I hope it will inspire you. And did you know that WAS is a membership organization, and you can become a member of WAS? Your organization can become a member of WAS if you support our vision, and there are multiple benefits. And you as an individual can also become a member of WAS. And if you are a member of a member organization of WAS, you can get even more benefits, like full access to the International Journal of Sexual Health by just paying a small additional membership fee. So please connect with us if you are interested in becoming a member, and it will give you Congress discount if you are a member of WAS. So the current state of sexual health globally, there's more than 350 million people are diagnosed with STIs annually. There's over 200 million women who do not have access to modern contraception. 70 million women terminate pregnancies each year, and some of them in environments where they don't have any rights to do so, and that puts them in severe danger. 38 million people continue to live with HIV. 70% of women have experienced physical or sexual violence, and unsafe sex is the biggest risk factor for untimely death of young women globally, and one of the top 5 health risk factors. And then we live in a world where there's natural disasters like the devastating earthquake that was experienced in Antalya. There's war, ongoing war as we speak today. There's climate change, and the pandemic's aftermath is still around. And there is significant economic instability, political instability, and serious human rights violations and extremists that run rife, trying to undo the good work that we have done for various reasons. So with this current state of sexual health and the state that the world is in, why is sexual pleasure important? Sexual pleasure is political. It is a fundamental part of sexual rights and a matter of human rights. And you can go and look at the Sexual Rights Declaration of the World Association for Sexual Health. The Congress, we will be telling you much more about this, but people have the right to the highest attainable standard of health with the possibility of pleasurable, satisfying, and safe experiences. And they also have the rights to the benefits of scientific progress. And the Congress is a place where you can come and learn about the benefits or about the scientific progress and take it back to your clinical work and let your patients benefit from this. It is their right to do so. So WAS pulled together a group of consultants. There are many, many famous faces on this picture. If you are a sexual health nerd like me, you will know many of these people. And they came up with a sexual rights declaration. And this was first in a year, you see our past president, Pedro Nobre, with the first version of this declaration in Mexico in 2019. And then finally in 2021 at the South African Congress, this was accepted by our General Assembly. And I wish I had time tonight to read this beautiful declaration to you as if it is an erotic poem, but there isn't enough time to read through it. I encourage you to find it on the internet. We can hopefully share the link to this here tonight as well, and go and read what this declaration is about. We will certainly share much more about it at the Congress as well. So the declaration highlights the importance of placing sexual pleasure in the forefront of sexual health promotion, comprehensive sexual health education. And we've got research. WHO got involved in the research about the efficacy of including pleasure in sexual health education. And I'm a mom of a 4 and a 6-year-old, and I firmly believe in sexual pleasure being included in comprehensive sexual health education to protect my children. And sexual health services. If you're a sexual health service provider, a doctor, a psychologist, a counselor, a physiotherapist, whatever level you're involved in sexual health, we want you to put sexual pleasure on the forefront of your service delivery. And then, of course, also sexual health policy. Pleasure as an essential ingredient of sexual health and rights is what we're trying to achieve with this. International comparative research consistently shows that diverse forms of sexual pleasure improve both individual happiness. So, of course, we know that if you're experiencing sexual pleasure, it makes you happy for most people. But on top of that, it improves overall health as well as relationship quality, which contributes to the health and well-being of individuals. If your relationship is better, it's better with you, as many of you have experienced in your lives as well. So of individuals, of couples, of families, and of whole communities. So sexual pleasure is actually about creating better communities. To the extent that the society is concerned for the well-being of individuals and the stability of couples, families, and communities, it is in the interest of policymakers to recognize the importance of sexual pleasure and to implement sexual health promotion programs that address sexual pleasure as fundamental to individual and partnered health and well-being. Failing to address sexual pleasure perpetuates gender inequalities. So we know that social norms often think that the pursuit of pleasure is dangerous and that it poses a risk to society. But from the evidence, it shows that it is actually the opposite. Of course, it needs to happen within a rights context, never ever infringing on the rights of others. But it actually has significant value within societies. I would not be volunteering as the president of WAS and leave my clinical practice behind for so many hours and my children if I didn't firmly believe that sexual health, rights, justice, and pleasure can make the world a better place. So we, on the 4th of September every year, has been celebrating World Sexual Health Day. And last year, our theme was Let's Talk Pleasure. And it is so important that WHO also supported World Sexual Health Day under the same theme. And we are very grateful for that and seeing how it is gaining traction globally. And around the same time that the Sexual Pleasure Declaration was published, this beautiful article, In Pursuit of Pleasure, a biopsychosocial perspective on sexual pleasure and gender, was also published. And the main author was Elna, a very famous sexologist from the Netherlands, a very close friend of WAS, who has recently passed away, unfortunately. And one of the other authors is Erik Janssen, our scientific chair that you have met earlier tonight. And if you only read one article about sexual pleasure in your whole life, this is the one to read. It's open source on the official journal of WAS. So if you just put in that title, The Pursuit of Pleasure and Ellen Lon or something like that on the internet, you will find it in our official journal. And for only $50 a year, you can subscribe to the journal and get all of the journal articles of all our publications. But this particular article is, thanks to Ellen Lon's foundation, open source. So my favorite part of this article is a new definition of sex, which is a sexually pleasurable activity fictionally shared among equals, not putting a penis into a vagina. Sex is a sexually pleasurable activity shared among equals. And unfortunately, not all individuals have equal opportunities to experience sexual pleasure. Sexual pleasure is often a given for men. 95% of men experience sexual pleasure during an interaction, and for only 65% of women, and only 20 to 30% of women regularly orgasm from penile-vaginal sex, whereas over 90% of men do. In one large American survey, 30% of women experience pain during their last sexual interaction. 1 in 3 women, and 1 in 20 men did, but there's still a massive gap. In many countries, only problems that interfere with men's sexual pleasure or procreation are reported. For instance, I remember going to China and then just seeing all of these andrology and infertility clinics, but where are all the female sexual dysfunction clinics? Where are all the female sexual dysfunction specialists? You find them in America, and maybe in some other countries in the global north, but where are they in the global south? And then there is very limited research about sexual pleasure in general, but especially so in LGBTQIA communities. And I encourage you, if you're a researcher, please focus your research towards pleasure. We need to know more and understand more about this, because why? Why is research important? Yes, it changes clinical practice, but did you know that sex research changes laws and policies globally? And for me, that's extremely important, because that influences many, many more lives. So this pleasure gap, the sexual activity in most cultures is less pleasurable and associated with greater cost for women than for men. And even if they do not differ in their capacity to experience pleasure, men and women aren't created that much differently. Men aren't these sex gods with amazing ability for pleasure, and women much less. We all have an ability for pleasure, but the focus on pleasure is often less in women. And I'm saying this fully cognizant of the fact that in many relationships, this is the other way around, and cognizant of the fact that there are many non-binary people that might not relate with my statement at all, and that it might really not be applicable to anyone. But the research shows to this big gap. The pleasure gap is not biological. We need to remove the restrictions for women's opportunities for pleasure, and any other person on this planet that is experiencing restrictions for pleasure. And that will be the basis for gender equality and enabling factor for sexual justice, which is what we're working towards. Removing restrictions to sexual pleasure is a protection of human rights and an act of sexual justice. So what are these restrictions that we see towards sexual pleasure? In many societies, there's a notion that the seeking of sexual pleasure is dangerous, destructive, and a negative force that will lead to societal chaos and anarchy. I come from a very religious country. I know Turkey is also a religious country. And these notions often pose, government thinks that it is a threat to them if people are going to seek pleasure. For centuries, medicine and psychiatry contributed to this notion by advocating for any sex other than that of procreational purposes as being unhealthy and posing a risk to the stability of individuals and societies. And on top of that, women are often socialized to put the needs of others first and not insist on their own pleasure. So this is just an example. Last year, I traveled all over the world to go and visit all of the federations of WAS. And this was in Asia, Oceania. And this was the sexual rights, the sexual justice initiative at this Congress. And it was a wonderful Congress. I learned a lot. But look at this. 2 women surrounded by all men. And I respect those men, all of them. But it is just the reality. And even tonight here, you see a same kind of a representation. And we were not very much welcomed to talk about pleasure in a very conservative, or it was challenging, let's rather put it, it was very challenging to talk about pleasure in such an environment. And then all of you that have attended conferences, you know, there's an exhibition area. And at this exhibition area, this was on display, and this is birthing pants. So this is a suit that a woman can wear to cover her whole body. And then this little flap here in front is what is used to then open for, and then the doctor can get in there for the baby to come out, because a woman is not supposed to expose her legs in such an environment. So in this environment, that is the focus. Then you go to South Africa, where sex toys can be sold, and there's more of a liberal sexual health industry. And at our conference, on display was this product, you know, of people that promote sexual health products, lubricants, and so forth. And then I go to America, in Miami, and then you actually see a penis in the display area, and this massive penis pump here. So what is the societal norm definitely differs all over the world. And then the religious norms also differ. You have 84% of the globe's population that identify with a religious group, and of 55% of those are Christian, Muslim, or Jewish. And all of these religions prohibit masturbation and sex toys. Some allow it with discretionary use, but the notion of sin still informs the major religious discourse and imposes guilt and shame on the pursuit of sexual pleasure. And as I said, I'm a woman of faith myself, and I respect religious views. And I believe that with education, we could move some of those conceptions into an area where sexual pleasure can be better embraced for the sake of the individual and ultimately societies, as I've said, without compromising a person's faith. And then there's laws and policies. So, for instance, I did a talk for the International Society for Sexual Medicine today on sex toys and found out that sex toys are illegal to sell in all of these countries. And I mean, even in a country like Saudi, you can't find a tampon. You're not allowed to buy a tampon as a woman. So those restrictions on something as a basic female hygiene need, never mind accessing something like a dildo if you wanted to. So in Africa, it's quite confusing about the legalities. And of course, there's strict rules about advertising to minors to protect minors. And I want that as well as a mother. I don't want people to have obscenities all over. I don't want to drive past a billboard with an obscenity on it. I guess what I would see as obscene is probably a little bit different from what someone from a much more conservative environment will see. But we don't want to change society into a place where there are naked people having sex on billboards. That's definitely not the intention, but also laws and policies can't prevent people from access consensual pleasure. And then the censoring by Facebook and Instagram, we cannot put a webinar like this on promotion because they very particularly say must not focus on sexual pleasure. And that's something that WAS would still like to address in future to make sure that, these things are done rationally. Of course, you don't want to expose children to it, but consenting adults should have access to this. It infringes on their rights to information, to scientific progress, and actually to sexual health, well-being, and pleasure, and also on the rights of people trying to make a living out of sexual health. Then there's significant financial restrictions to sexual pleasure. Just to give an example, in a country like where I live, where 25% of people have food poverty, buying a simple lubricant can be 2 days of wages, but with 1 day of wage, just you need to feed 3 or 4 people. So you cannot afford to go and buy a lubricant with that. You need to buy food. A high-end vibrator would be a whole month's earnings for those people who are lucky enough to have a job. And sexual dysfunction clinics don't exist in government. Basically, I mean, we do have gender clinics and there are certain specialist clinics in South Africa, but basically you need to go for private healthcare, and that's about a week's labor. So in the rest of Africa, 85% of people live off less than $5 or $5.50 a day. So people do not have the means to access pleasure often, especially if they need help with that. And then there are financial restrictions. The training of credible sexual health providers is very scarce in the global south. When I trained in Australia, I couldn't train as a sexologist in South Africa. I needed to go to Australia, and it was what a doctor of my qualification at that time earned in about 3 or 4 years, my annual income, to get my training in Australia that I actually had to pay for. So it's impossible for most people to get proper training due to the financial restrictions. And if you don't have very trained, credible sexual health providers, who are the people that are going to help people to really experience better sexual pleasure? All healthcare providers and educators can help people to improve their access to sexual pleasure. You do not have to be a specialist to be able to do that. And I'll show you how now, hopefully only in 3 more minutes. How can you do it ethically? You need to follow the PLICIT model, like what we do for any other sexual health matters. And for those of you who are not that familiar with sexual health, PLICIT stands for permission, limited information, specific suggestions, and then intensive therapy, if necessary, for a few people that you might need to refer. And this was developed by Annan in 1976 already. So this first step is permission. How do you know that you have permission to talk about sexual pleasure during the consultation? And how do you give the patient the permission to talk to you about it? We've got all of these esteemed colleagues from Turkey here. They work in andrology, infertility, psychiatry. How do they know that it's okay to ask a patient, How is your ability to experience sexual pleasure? Are you experiencing any challenges with that? The first thing is that if you look at the WAS ethical principles, what's extremely important is that you have proper professional preparation. So what would the appropriate preparation be? Of course, the first choice is to have a formal tertiary education in sexual health from a university. We will never say that you shouldn't try and do that. But if you can't attain that, you can still complete a SAR training, a sexual attitude reassessment. You can learn the pleasure principles, and I'll show you more about that now. You can do the training of the pleasure meter by the Global Advisory Board. You can do accredited courses through private institutions. You can belong to your local sexual health organizations if they offer educational sessions that are pleasure focused. You can read journals on pleasure, publishing research on pleasure. You can do clinical supervision with a good clinical supervisor, and you can work in a multidisciplinary team with a focus. And of course, you can come and join us in Antalya, where we will definitely teach you a lot more about pleasure. So this is what a typical advertisement for a sexual attitude reassessment would look like. It exposes you to all kinds of things that people might experience as pleasure, and basically teach you not to, as they say, yuck another person's yum, and not be judgmental about ways that people might experience pleasure. And these are the pleasure principles. The Pleasure Project is one of the member organizations of WAS, and they offer a training on their website on these pleasure principles. And there's a training toolkit that's free on the web that you can download, that was developed by the Global Advisory Board, also on pleasure. Then it's important that you practice within your scope. When I'm talking about helping a patient with sexual pleasure, I'm definitely not talking about actually, being sensually involved with them at all, any kind of sexual activity, nothing like that with the patient. There are people who are not healthcare professionals who are trained in that, but this is not what I'm talking about. For you as a healthcare professional to physically get involved in your patient's pleasure, please stay within your scope and practice ethical curiosity. We don't talk to people about sex just to like, tell me what you are into, kind of sexy things. No, you talk about it very professionally. And there's actually a way to do it, but I don't have time to go into that tonight. I commit to doing a training for healthcare professionals at the Congress to really teach you practically how to bring sexual pleasure into your consultations when we have more time. Take a thorough history from your patients and make sure that they have the self-determination, that they can give consent, that there's safety, privacy, confidence, the ability to communicate, and the ability to negotiate. If those things are the premise for sexual pleasure, it does not help you end up with an orgasm when you are raped, because some people do, and that's not sexual pleasure at all. So these things need to be in place first, and that's why sex education is so extremely important for healthy relationships in the end, because these things need to be in place for people to be able to experience sexual pleasure. There's a pleasure meter that you can use to determine this in patients. That's part of that training that I showed you. Then the next step of the Plicit model is permission and then limited information. But I want to say rather legitimate information. Don't give your patients a little bit of information, give them good information. And what's good information? That is scientific, evidence and rights-based, experience-informed, context-sensitive information about sexual health and functioning. What I tell Christian woman that hasn't been able to consummate her marriage for 8 years is not the same as the information I'm going to give a queer girl from Uganda or a Jewish woman in New York. It's different information, and it will always be scientific and evidence and rights-based and experience-informed, but it needs to be sensitive to that person's context. And then the specific suggestions that you then give patients. Okay, you have anorgasmia. These are my suggestions. I'm a doctor. I can actually treat it with hormones. Or I'm a psychotherapist and I'm going to help you to resolve your childhood trauma. Whatever it is, make sure that it is actually evidence-based, experience-informed, and context-sensitive as well. And then for intensive therapy, there are people that you will definitely need to refer unless you yourself are a highly trained psychosexual provider. You've had the opportunity to go to a university and get specific training in this. You refer those patients with sexual abuse, the ones who have low scores on that pleasure meter, the enabling factors for sexual pleasure that might need additional help to first get that right before they can actually pursue pleasure. And then any patient that you don't feel comfortable to treat, and of course, all patients who ask for a referral. My conclusion is we have to figure out how to incorporate a value for pleasure into healthcare services, grounded in the assumption that pleasure is a fundamental reason why people have sex, and that acknowledging this can support people in creating safer and more pleasurable sexual experiences. I quote this directly from the technical document of the Sexual Pleasure Declaration. And what we are on to next is the War Sexual Justice Declaration. Alan, our vice president that you've met, is the chair of that committee. And next we need to figure out how can we actually make sure that people do have access to all of these rights, and that the services are in place, and that there are things that can happen if they don't access these rights and services. So I look forward to seeing you in Antalya. You see this is the Mirage Park Resort, and you see this place. That is where I'm going to party with you in Antalya in November. I look forward to meeting you there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elna. Thanks for this brilliant and thought-provoking presentation. And let me just give a brief emphasis on the points that you have presented. And during the presentation, Elna talked more about the differences, but still having good communication and good negotiation with you. I think as humans, we have more commonalities than differences. And of course, it doesn't hurt the banana that the peach is pink. So we have to learn to grow in diversity, and we have to learn to understand that it's time for, negotiating, for understanding other people. All of the people in the world are connected to each other with invisible ties, and we have to understand that all of the human beings are a part of a chain, and the strongest chain depends on the weakest link. So we have to really stand by the weakest link and promote sexual health for others. You have talked about unsafe sex, which is very important for all human beings at the moment. And you have talked about disasters, either natural disasters and also man-made disasters. As you know, until now, psychiatry has kind of make the distinction between natural disasters and man-made disasters. But now at the moment, when you think about all of the experiences we had in the past, we know that it cannot be divided into natural and man-made disasters, but it's a combination of both. Sometimes we ignore things that could prevent all these disasters. So we have to think about a new way of perspective, which tells us that due to neglect of human beings, we have lots of disasters happening in the world. And what's the point of talking about sexual pleasure when there's so much pain in the world? So I really appreciate that you brought this issue into your talk, because I always believe that life is not about only feeling the good, but feeling everything. And I always think that different kind of emotions tells us more about our needs, and every emotion is helpful. And I don't divide them either to negative or positive, because every emotion is there to teach us something, to teach us about our needs and, our decisions to change what's going on, which we don't appreciate. So we also talked about living in a world of uncertainty. And I think it's very important that we have to learn to embrace the uncertainty, because embrace the uncertainty is not an exception, but a rule in our lives. So my plenary talk during the opening presentation will be about embracing our uncertainty and managing worry and anxiety in times of global crises, which is not probably totally about sexuality or sexual disorders, but something that we all need at this point. So I think it's very important that you mentioned that sexual pleasure is political, And sexual rights and sexual health is not a luxury anymore, but a necessity for all of the human beings, for their well-being and for quality of life. And I have to tell you that some of these, I mean, I have to tell the Turkish people who are with us tonight that declarations of the WAS is now translated into Turkish, and they can find it on our website. Thank you so much for, referring to both Pedro Nobre, which I forgot to talk, who has been my friend since the year 2000, when I met him first, and 2000, and then now it's 23 years that I have known him. He's the immediate past president of WAS, who has contributed a lot and a good friend of mine. And then Elna, who has contributed so much into this area. I guess I'm the person who knows Ellen from university when she was a student, and I appreciate her work. And when I met her in a CBT Congress, Cognitive Behavior Therapy Congress in Amsterdam, after hearing to her presentation, I remember myself telling her that you will be a great star in the field of sexology. And then she said that I was joking with her, but then it came to be true that she has done and she has contributed a lot into the area of sexuality and sexual rights and sexual pleasure. And you also mentioned about the that sexuality is shared among equals. So you are actually talking about sex as pleasure rather than sex for non-sexual reasons, because lots of women nowadays have sex for non-sexual reasons, and you have really emphasized the importance of the pleasure principle, which we need to have a positive bias with, because most of the time we either have sexual positive, sexual negative kind of societies, and we have to be positively biased about sex and sexual pleasure. And also you talked about despite all of these laws and policies about censoring, about financial restrictions, we need to really present sexual pleasure as a human necessity, as a kind of human rights. And you talked about the implicit model. And I think the most important point that you raised is that sexual pleasure can only be discussed in the context of sexual rights without abusing the other people's rights. So these points that you brought in was incredible. And Ellen told that you have lots of talents. I have to tell on top of that you are a person that we appreciate, and you have made a better WAS, and I know that WAS will improve during your presidency, and you have contributed a lot, and I hope that you keep your energy to contribute more towards promoting sex and sexual health and rights and justice all around the world. Thank you for your presentation. And there are a few questions and answers. I think it's time to get the questions and answers. Can you see them, Elna, in your one question?
Yes.
Is from Eleonora Delgado, if I'm pronouncing the name right. Says that even in developed countries, sexuality has many restrictions. In social media, for advertising sexual health services as a sex therapist or sexual dysfunction treatment, most platforms have so many restrictions. Even use of words such as vagina, ejaculation, and others, which can't be used on Instagram, Facebook, and others, even when you are just trying to make educational content. So has WAS done anything about this? Because it's a worldwide issue that limits sex education and to spread information that can help people to achieve better sexual health. What can we do? This is one of the questions.
So WAS has a theory of change. That means that all of the board of WAS and the past presidents got together and we said, these are the important things that we want to address in the world, and this is definitely one of them. If people hear on what kind of budget WAS has been operating, they will cry. So unfortunately, this hasn't been at the top of the priority list, but it is certainly, if anyone on this webinar knows someone really senior at Facebook, please get me in. I'll jump on a plane this weekend to go and speak to them because I'm sure, I actually think it is a lack of knowledge. You know, if they knew, they must be clever enough to better incorporate this, but there's probably no political will on that side, and they're erring on the side of caution. But it is certainly for me personally, you know, because I have my business is in digital content. It's my business, so it is so frustrating. So certainly a priority for me.
Thank you. There's another one. I think this is the first question. Although it is true, it's striking that the data presented in current state of sexual health are so marked mainly by the biomedical. Do you think it's important to think about it another way to change the way we see sexual health, thinking in relation to sexual pleasure and sexual justice?
No, absolutely. You know, the reason why it's biomedical is because that's where the money has been, because people invest in public health matters. If you have, like in our country, all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of people dying from AIDS, that's where you invest money and not in pleasure. So typically, there has been much more money for biomedical research. And also, of course, biomedical research is driven by pharma money. So it's not by philanthropists and by governments. And we need philanthropists and governments and other NGOs to donate towards good sex research. And Eric Janssen is someone that can tell us about what would that kind of sex research look like that could actually give us a better understanding and a less biomedical understanding of this.
Exactly. I think that bias could even go into definitions by classification systems. If you go to definition of erectile failure or erectile problems, you can find that they refer to rigidity of the penis, which, you know, we fought for decades to reduce this understanding that the penis does not have to be like an iron. And now they bring the rigidity in, and I think there's conflict of interest. Of course, we are always kind of under the influence of pharmaceutical companies and things like that. So we have to understand that it's biomedical and it's also biopsychosocial aspects of sexuality. So one part of it cannot be isolated from the whole. So that's very important. And
I'm just wondering if we could get the other panelists here, because we've got so many
sure, if you want to say anything,
if
Eric,
they can
on
join.
that,
Eric, do you have a comment on how we can change sex research to be less biomedical?
So many thoughts. Such an important question. I think it makes me think, first of all, of the fact that the DSM, the way it is organized right now, there have been really serious attempts to change the way the DSM classifies and defines sexual dysfunctions that have failed because higher up at the APA, you know, the people who make the final decisions, none of those initiatives were accepted because they said there was a lack of research supporting those changes. So that's why we see such a big difference between men and women in the DSM, where with women, desire and arousal disorders are taken seriously. And when it comes to men, it's mostly erectile problems. But that people have tried to change that approach. But the point that was made is that we lack empirical research on which to make any changes. So research is crucial. And what it requires is obviously, you know, we're dependent on funding, but we're also depending on ideas and initiatives. And people just have to do more work and take sexuality in men as seriously as we increasingly do in women. And I think that the very narrow views on sexual health, in particular in men, but in general, you know, are being reinforced through. I tend to agree with a relatively strong biomedical perspective in sexual health research. So it comes down to us. We have to do the work.
exactly, and I think we have to keep in mind that most of the definitions are made on expert opinions rather than evidence-based data until now. So we need more evidence-based data to support all these definitions and so on. So it was based mainly on expert opinions, which could change even the incidence of different kind of sexual disorders. If you go and look for premature ejaculation, you can see a kind of incidence which changes between 3% and 40%, which means nothing to me in terms of science, because either the measure for premature ejaculation is wrong or the definition is made differently. So they just now try to make it more scientific by, clocks and things like that, but still it needs there's a lot of space to improve research and to make the definitions based on evidence and so on. So I think it's very important that we need more data, and I think we need to have more scientist practitioners which bases their practice on reliable evidence that comes from research. So research and clinical work should be going hand in hand to promote our definitions, to promote our understanding about sexuality and sexual health and sexual disorders. Okay, so anyone else who wants to contribute, or shall we carry on with the questions? So, training toolkit to discuss sexual pleasure for medical students. I don't know what the question is, but I think asking for a toolkit to discuss sexual pleasure for medical students, as I think this is a very important issue, because in most of the world, different parts of the world, there's no proper kind of sexual training, even for medical students. And we're talking about educating the lay people when there's not enough training, good enough training for medical professionals such as psychiatrists or medical doctors. It is difficult to talk about education, common education in the people, because that needs a lot of, combination of different kind of, let's say, ministries, such as the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. And when there's a kind of opposition from people who kind of refuse this kind of sexual education, what can authorities can do? So we need to make people understand that sexual pleasure, or information about sexuality, about discriminated groups and everything, is at least as important as sexual disorders. And it's difficult to talk about sexual education when there's lots of restrictions, censures, and so on. So I think we need to really have some books for, depending on the age groups, for children, for teachers, for parents, different kind of booklets or guides to really teach people, not only the students, but also their teachers. So training of the trainers is a major necessity at the moment. So Liz, did you want to say something? Sorry.
Just quickly, thank you. The resources that are shared by Dortje Brekken from Netherlands are are great, and the Global Advisory Board definition of sexual pleasure has been adapted and inspired for the WAS declaration also, so you can see it in the WAS declaration. And the resources that she has shared are very useful for all that are following us. As long as I have a microphone, I just want to say it should be, when Elna says it's democracy, access to pleasure, as an activist, as an educator, it should be so simple to give permission for people to masturbate. And we have so many obstacles for that. Even public policy, a government will never say, go ahead and masturbate. What can we do? That's it.
Yeah, relevant to your statement, there's a question which says consent is essential for pleasure, especially the proactive one. How can consent be assessed and developed in therapy?
I forgot to mention, unfortunately, that this year's theme is consent for World Sexual Health Day. And we will be hearing a lot from WAS about consent. We will definitely have a whole webinar just on consent. And people don't like it when I say consent is nuanced, because of course no means no. But there's consent related to teenagers for gender affirming care. There is enthusiastic consent and all kinds of other less enthusiastic consent. And what's the meaning of that, and when does it become coercion? And there are so many other enabling factors that play into consent, and that's exactly why we want to make the theme of World Sexual Health Day consent, to hear from everyone, to get our members and organizations and people from the general public to engage with us in order to better understand consent. There's great consent research. One of our vice chairs of the scientific committee, Terry Humphreys, does his research particularly on consent, and many others too. If you're doing research on consent, please submit your abstracts and come and tell us about it at the conference. I would love to put together a good long panel discussion on consent at the conference.
Yes, that would be excellent. There was a comment saying that looking at the, let me just see if I can pick it up. And they're asking about, looking at the scientific committee, there's a question about there will be more, it is mainly more clinical than ideas such as sexual justice, sexual rights approach. And I think Ellen, you can talk about this, because we are this will be one of the most important issues during our Congress, which is about sexual and sexual rights, justice and rights. Would you like to comment on that?
First, I want to come back to the question of research, which is central, to our messages, and to say that even research, the freedom of research, is threatened. At the moment, it is threatened in different countries with a reduction of funding for research on sexuality. And especially as Jessica said, in the chat, there is little money to study the positive aspects of sexuality as if it was not part of health. Most of the money goes on risk, and it gives an image of sexuality as a source of risk and danger. And I remember there was a conference called Pleasure and Danger. So we need to reestablish the balance, between pleasure, danger, and risk, and in order to help, to support the activities of educators, and of clinicians, and of public health administrators who have a very important role. About sexual rights and sexual justice, this is one of the it is one of the work that we are doing at the moment. We want to go beyond the sexual rights. Sexual rights are a question of individuals, and justice and injustice have to do with systems. So if we want and we need to develop our intervention, not only with people, but towards systems that produce those obstacles that we are speaking about, and those in particular, and especially those inequalities between genders, between age, between social class, between ethnicity, between countries. There are so many inequalities. And one last point is that I want to comment is about the old people, the older people. When we see in France, at the moment, there was a big scandal about the way old senior citizens are treated in the house, for retirement. And there was a big scandal because they don't receive enough food, they don't receive enough cleanliness, the hygiene tools that everybody needs, at some point of their life. But in the report that was given to the Ministry of Health, there was not a single word about affectivity, relationship, love, care, and sexuality. It is like though if those people are treated like physiological wholes, you know, the foods come from one side and then it comes out from the other side. And the emotional dignity, sexuality coming out from isolation is not taking into account. And this is something that we need to do, you know, when we have in mind sexual justice, to remind that the quality and the dignity of being a human person is not to be reduced as a physiological body. You know, we have emotional, affective, and spiritual aspiration. I don't like to speak needs about this, you know, dimension, but we need to remind of that. And putting back sexuality at the front page, you know, is a way of reestablishing some dignity and some humanities to those who are deprived such humanity.
Could I still also jump in and related to that question about the scientific committee? I'm not sure if I fully understood it, but we do have different tracks, and we only one is focused on clinical aspects. So it's really just one component of the scientific committee. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. Maybe it's more related to who is involved in what for the organization of the conference, maybe. But the scientific committee is really reflecting all kinds of different aspects of sexuality and sexual rights. I just want to throw in one additional thing about the connection between sexual health and sexual pleasure. You can think of it in various ways. From a research perspective, you could talk about this for a long time as well. But I think one way to approach it is not just as an outcome of sex, like sex can be pleasurable. You can also think of sexual pleasure as a requirement for good sex and for healthy sex. And I think we need more research on that too, because of course that interacts and is related to notions like consent and wanting and the combination of those in interaction. So there's still a lot to be done, but my earlier point about research and sexual health, the biomedical approach, is that indeed the literature is largely still missing that focus on the pleasure aspects. And I do think that the more research we do on it, the less we will, in years to come, be able to even fall back to strictly biological, biomedical ways of thinking about sex. Because the literature will have to be more in balance, and that will, even in the long run, it affect the way we diagnose and classify problems. And what I said earlier was not as much outside of the DSM, but even within the DSM, there have been very strong efforts to change ways to look at sexual problems that are not as focused on basic sexual function per se, but more the experience of the psychological dimensions and the experience of pleasure. And I think that is a process that will continue. And the more research we do on those things, the more impact it will have in the longer run on. So regardless of funding, which is an issue, it's always been an issue. We have to just march on, so to speak.
Thanks, Eric. I think it's important that you emphasize that we have different tracks, and I would suggest all of the people in here, including the person who have asked the question, to look into our website and see that there are 7 different tracks, and one of these tracks is about therapy and clinical side, and there are 6 more different tracks. And on top of that, I think it's very important that you mentioned about lack of research about sexual pleasure. And I mentioned, I don't want to go into the details, but lots of people make sex for non-sexual reasons. So we need to really be aware of sexual pleasure. And we have to know about the notion of responsive desire which was not mentioned before. As you can remember, it was more linear. Men and women were, assumed to have the same kind of sexual responses and so on, which has now been changed. And there's perhaps nothing called spontaneous desire, but, kind of responsive desire as well. So we need to have more research on sexual pleasure and its implications on clinical practice. So thank you for that. Elna, there's a question for you, and this question is saying, which is the relationship, what I think she means to say, or he means to say, it's from Victoria, and Victoria says, which is relationship between intimacy and pleasure. So actually the question probably means, what is the relationship between intimacy and pleasure? Is there any answer for that on your side? That question is especially for you.
Yeah, so I think one would intuitively think that if people have better pleasure in their experience, it will lead to intimacy. But people can have extremely pleasurable activities with someone that they don't even know. That they might not have an intimate relationship with at all. And people might have a fantastic intimate relationship, emotional intimacy and other forms, spiritual intimacy, experiential intimacy, but not have sexual pleasure. So I don't know about the research. Do we have any research on this? If there's anyone that knows about research on this, I would love to hear about it. You think it's kind of implied, but I don't know if we know. I would like to give Dr. Kore also a chance to maybe say something if he wants to here on our panel as a final comment. It's coming towards the end of our session, so I just don't want to miss out to also give him an opportunity to say something, please.
So I'm looking at the questions, so I didn't see Koray raising hands. So please, Koray, join in.
Maybe I can just add on the last issue that was discussed about sexual rights and sexual justice and being clinicians in the organizing committee. I think the main task is that we need to include clinicians to a toolkit that they should be aware of the structural difficulties in the society and the individual is trying to survive within, which the clinician should be prepared to deal with sexual rights and sexual injustices in the society. So it's a part of the clinician's work. It's not something that is related to the work of non-clinicians, or it's not a non-clinical issue anymore. So any clinician or any professional health worker should be aware of these sexual right and sexual justice issues, and they should be an advocate of these issues, even in individuals and society. So I think the distinction between the clinicians and non-clinicians about the sexual rights and sexual justice is it's an artificial distinction. So we need the tracks, of course. In organization, it's easier for us to organize our meetings, but actually we should be engaging them together. That's what I think.
Thanks very much. That's very important that we have to consider the sensitivity, and we have to be really open to the vulnerabilities of people. And it is not a standard world, and we're working with diversity, and every clinician should be aware about the needs for diverse populations, sexual rights. Clinician, of course, you have to be involved with research if you're a researcher. That's the reason why I called it a scientist practitioner. We have to be scientist practitioners. We have to base our treatments on science, and that artificial tracks is just for submissions, but in fact they are all integrated to one, and we have to keep that in mind. Thank you for reminding us. There's a Turkish person's question, which from Yiğit, and I have to ask this question, and this is: thank you for enlightening presentation, Dr. Elna. Religious aspect is important, as you have emphasized. In case of sexual pleasure for homosexual people, what is your organization's goals or recommendations in regards to the religious rules that disapproves homosexuals or abnormal sexual behavioral acts inside their religious scriptures?
also, I would refer people to the Sexual Rights Declaration. And as an organization, we do not get involved ourselves, on a day-to-day running of any particular church or any particular religious group. We are for religious freedom, but we believe that the Sexual Rights Declaration holds truth across all religions.
Thank you. There's a question which is clinical and from Sila, and she says, individuals who have been diagnosed with vaginismus visit doctors, and doctors sometimes refuse patients because they are single. Can vaginismus treatment be performed on individuals that don't have partners? Of course, yes. Let me answer this question. And we have lots of people who come on their own. Of course, we know that the progress of the therapy is kind of determined by the sexual exercises and so on in vaginismus. So we give couples some homework to carry on in their own homes. But at the moment, of course, we have to be more sensitive to needs of individuals who suffer from vaginismus or any other people. Like the same applies for people who come single, for premature ejaculation, for erectile dysfunction, and so on. So obviously there are lots of, this was, I mean, the idea that the prognosis of the treatment is better when they come as couples does not necessarily mean that we can do anything for individuals who come forward to seek help on their own. So there are lots of protocols for those people who come on their own to seek treatment to improve or to really deal with vaginismus. So we can talk about this later. And there's a question which is about, is there a tool developed to measure pleasure? Is there any tool to develop measure? Any answers for that?
I know that, sorry, now it's getting
Yes,
late.
we have
Hello?
I mean, one of the former members of the advisory committee, Patricia Pasquale, published a paper about an instrument to measure sexual pleasure, which is very interesting. Patricia Pasquale, I don't have the reference in mind, but it is, I think it is in Journal of Sex Research or something like that.
There's another
Sorry.
There's another measure
I
developed
mean,
in the Netherlands.
I think she measure, satisfaction
Yes.
more than pleasure. Yes.
There's a sexual pleasure measure, a sexual pleasure questionnaire developed in the Netherlands that has been published. I don't know off the top of my head, but it has been an early attempt because it's obviously a very complex construct to measure. But I can try and find the publication.
Well, I guess that you're talking about subjective measures rather than, there's no objective kind of, instrument to really measure the pleasure. But of course, the subjective feedback given by people are very important, and that we can't decide what pleasure is for the others as well, but we can also keep to work on that. But I think subjective measures are available. Another question is about research funding has largely
just about the measurement of pleasure. Sorry, I have shared one that Dorje, who has shared a lot of resources, and Anton Castellanos, they wrote the pleasure meter. That's one of the measures. While we find the link for Patricia's and Eric's, I have shared one that has been published also that can be useful. Thank you.
Please join in, because as I'm looking at the questions, I cannot see you on the screen. So join in. Sorry if I can't see that. I'm looking at the questions, so I can't see you. So please feel free to join in. Another question from Jessica Blaney is, research funding has largely centered around risk than pleasure. Any suggestions on ways to research priorities at a higher level to get this important work funded?
We discussed it before already. We responded to it.
Yeah, I think so. It's common to see people who consider that pleasure is a right only for healthy and young people. What do you consider to be the main barrier that makes professionals limit themselves in the possibility of contemplating pleasure as something important for people in conditions of illness? disability and even at the end of life? And what would be an appropriate strategy to dismantle this barrier? I think this is a very important question. It's something that when we talk about past, present, and future of sexual health, I think for those people who suffer from sexual problems and who suffer from lack of pleasure, I think this is a need for future to talk about disabled people, about in conditions of illness, disability, and even at the terminal stage of life. So any suggestions for this question?
Yes, I mean, one of the major obstacles is the attitudes of the providers of care, because most of the providers are much younger, and I'm speaking for the old people. They are younger than the old people, and they have difficulties imagining that people who have the age of their parents have sexual activity, and this is something which is very difficult, to work out with the clinician, with the educators, with the nurses, that to accept that those who are older and those who are sick, also those people who suffer from chronic disease and even the end of life. And there was a wonderful paper from Hoot Janoten about the end of life sexual drive, of people who want to enjoy sex as much as possible because they know that they are going to die. And this is sometimes considered as unacceptable by the health providers and the health system. They consider that the hospital is not a brothel, where people can have sex. And this is something that needs to be really worked out at the level of the attitudes of the caregiver, of the regulation of the places, and the fact that it should be possible for the partner of one partner, of someone who is in a hospital setting, to spend time, intimacy with the one who is sick and who might die. And these ideas are very hard to come into the system, in a system where efficiency, making money, reducing costs is the most important obsession, of administrators.
Okay, there is one more question about the same question, actually, about the LGBTQ community and the kind of challenges on advocating for these people with and without disabilities when it comes to pleasure and consent. Are there any tools or data that would help, especially for this community?
What we see is being generated globally is there are people who come forward with amazing content that is very much directed to specific groups, and that is what we want to encourage at WAS, that people use globally available information, but then also go and make it context sensitive. And one of our dreams also at WAS is to become like a kind of a repository where people can actually put all of this information on and have open access to it, to just do few adaptations to make it culturally more appropriate. Because again, what is culturally appropriate to a girl in a wheelchair in my daughter's school is not the same as in Uganda, for instance. And we just need to keep on passionately develop evidence-based, scientific, rights-based information, experience-informed, not be these ones on this screen making a pamphlet for people living with disabilities, but actually getting the disability community involved themselves. We've got wonderful healthcare providers who are living with disabilities, and help them to become credible sexual health providers who can then write that disability information. I think that is what WAS is all about, to be inclusive and really have a participatory process when we generate stuff, and we can encourage people from all around the world not to sit in high paid offices and generate information only based on evidence, but have the experience informed aspect to that as well. I would also like to encourage our panel to wrap things up. So I, from my side, want to thank you, Mehmet, for hosting tonight and doing it so professionally and so extremely eloquently, and for everyone that joined us for the webinar tonight, and also for all of our panelists from my side for your contribution. It's been an absolute privilege to be part of this with you tonight.
I would also like to express my gratitude to all of the people who actually contributed to this event, and thanks, Elna, for supporting this progress. And I have to inform all people in here that this is the first webinar, but not the last webinar. There will be lots of webinars going on until the beginning of our Congress. So please follow the website of WAS and also follow us, and we will come up with different kind of webinars in the future, touching to cutting edge kind of important research, important advances, and so on. So please stay with us, and thanks for being so patient to stay with us through the whole time. There was a two more questions, but I'm afraid that we can't take it at this moment. But keep your questions for the Congress, if possible, please, and we will be able to, to discuss and to get your contributions. And as I said before, the scientific quality and also the social quality of Congress always depends on the contributions of its delegates. So I'm hoping that you will all actively participate, and we'll be happy to give you the platform to present your work, to tell about your thoughts, and to share your opinions with the audience. So stay with us, and please keep checking our websites for further information. And thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Elna. Thanks, Koray, staying until the end. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Louis. Thanks to all of these people. Thanks to Michelle. Thanks to Deacon, who has helped us to provide this webinar. And stay safe and connected, please. Thank you.